Let's get started. Okay, so I'm Riley Hewitt. I'm here with my teammates Jacob Silverman, Avery Lorman, and Peter Ryu. We're here representing the Vanderbilt University Sports Business and Analytics Club, and we're really excited to talk to you all today about two high coverages. I don't know why that happened. Sorry. Okay, let's get back to slide two, which is where we want to be. Okay, so a little preview of what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to start talking about what situations teams tend to run two high coverages in. Then we're going to talk about how we filtered out all situational football to stick with just normal play calling scenarios. We're going to get into a little team by team analysis on usage and effectiveness with two high coverage, talk about our plan on attacking two high coverages, then get a little bit into the game theory and how we want to stay balanced, an analysis of the Minnesota Vikings specifically, and finally, our game plan and play. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Avery.
Awesome. Thank you, Riley. Yeah, we're just right here. We're going to break down a little bit of like the situation of football. When do teams run too high? Looking here, we're looking at down and distance, looking at yards to go. Basically, the main takeaway from here is that as the yards to go, your increase, on our far left, we have 1 to 3 yards to go, and then where you have 11 plus, as that increases, regardless of the down, percentage of too high coverage is going to increase inherently because the team is going to be more likely to pass the ball. Here, we're looking at field position. This helps us understand how basically on the goal line or on the opponent's goal line, the rate of pass plays, the rate of too high coverage is going to inherently decrease because the likelihood of the ball being ran is a lot higher on the goal line as you're going to hand it to running back. You don't want to turn it over. That's really the too high look is really going to decrease. Here, we're looking at score and time. On the far left, you have when you're leading. Main point being that when you're leading, the amount of the pass frequency decreases because your time management. You're looking, how do I manage the clock? How do I make sure the team doesn't get the ball back? And those are really important. So with that decreasing pass frequency, that decreases the amount of too high that is ran inherently. And then when we're tied, it all looks a lot more like all bets are off. It's a lot more, how can I win the game? How can I put my team in the best situation to play? And so it's a mix of a pass and run. And on the far right, when you see the highest pass frequency, the most passing is going on overall, the most amount of too high coverage is being ran. Here we're looking at over every single team in NFL, the impact of offensive tendencies. Really good example on the far right, Arizona Cardinals. They passed the ball about 70% of the time this year. Jacoby Brissett broke the single game completion record. And so like they're going to pass more. There's a correlation between too high is going to be ran more. And then on the far left, you think about Baltimore, and you got Derrick Henry. Then you got a guy who's a threat at the running back, may not going to be ran as much. So they're just too high is not going to be as present. And then here we're just going to kind of break down the standard play calling situations. We want to make sure that our data that we want standard situations and not being affected by extra play calling situations. On our left, dictating a little bit when we look at when teams are running the ball. Again, it's going to be in that red zone. It's going to be end zone. That's when they're running the ball a lot. Therefore, there's less passing plays. They want to get the ball in the end zone. They don't want less chance of turning it over. On our right, looking at the rush play percentage by your down and distance, third and fourth down, the amount of pass rush decreases, pass increases. So when we're looking at our data, we really want to look at in that green zone. And that our green zone is basically that we consider the 25% of plays where it's most ambiguous. There's not really a pattern. And so when we go to our game plan, that there is no, like, we're not having situational football being impacted. And then the coaches are just trying to make the best plays for their team to win. Team with situational football and kind of where we see situations impacting play calling. On our left, we have when you're up by a lot, or when you're down by a lot, there's impact in the play calling. So there's and that we're looking at the data in that green zone. And so like your rush percentage when you're up by a ton to increase, you're chewing clock. When you're down, you're not going to rush as much because you need the time. And then on your right, on the first half, you're inherently your rush percentage is going to decrease. As teams are holding the ball, they don't want to turn the ball over, and going into halftime, they want to be able to regroup and move forward. Therefore, we're looking at that data in the green zone, where the rush is more. You're able to have less situational football, and the patterns aren't as present. And kind of finally wrapping it up, basically looking at what we took out of our green zone, that important data. 22% of the impact play calling is kind of impacted by the field position where you are on the field, red zone. 25% is impacted by your down and distance. So kind of where you are in relation to where you want to get the first down, and then what down it is at first through fourth down. And then finally, time and score also impacts play calling. So about 14.2% is taken that out of all the play calling. Therefore, we found that about 37.8% of play calling is just standard coaches be coaches trying to win the game, put your team in the best situation without being impacted by situational football.
Thank you, Avery. I'll now do a team-by-team analysis on 2i usage and effectiveness. If you can see here, the Vikings had the highest 2i usage by at least 10% compared to any other teams. However, usage does not equal effectiveness. Chart on the left highlights the five best and five worst teams at running 2i coverage. Chart on the right highlights the five biggest risers and fallers when using 2i coverage. If you can see here on the right, it says difference. The difference is how much EPA per play drops when using other coverages. And you can see that the Browns have the best 2i usage, and they are the biggest risers when it comes to using 2i. So if they use 2i a lot more often, they would have had a more successful season possibly.
All right, thanks, Peter. All right, so now that we understand a little bit about how two high coverages are deployed across the league, let's get into how we specifically plan to attack them. All right, so in order to attack a two high coverage, it really helps to know when to expect to see it as an offense. And so the table on the left here shows the most common personnel groupings in order of how often they were met with a two high coverage. And this is really important because a defensive coordinator is going to see what personnel grouping we come in or come out of, and that's going to greatly affect their play call decision. And so what's really interesting here is that the three personnel groupings that were met with two high coverages the most often are all multiple tight end sets. So that's something we're going to want to keep in mind going forward when trying to predict when a defense might match our look with a two high coverage. Now on the right, it shows the same thing for receiver alignment instead of personnel. Receiver alignment has a slightly less impact on two high coverage percentage as personnel, and that makes sense. But it's still interesting to see, especially considering that the pass heavy spread formation is all the way at the top. So now that we know what looks are most likely to be met with a two high coverage, let's explore how to expose the two high coverage. So we looked at several different route concepts, and of them, inside verticals was the best at attacking two high, albeit in a small sample. Looking at two larger sample route concepts, double verticals, which is where two receivers on the same side of the field are running a vertical route, and smash, where you have an inside receiver running a corner and an outside receiver running a hook, were both extremely effective against two high coverage. While slant flat, double slant, and mesh concepts, which get a lot of their value from creating traffic over the middle of the field in man coverage looks, weren't as effective against two high coverages. So let's get into a little bit about why some of these route concepts work so well against two high coverages. So here we have that double verticals look, and we're showing it against that cover two. Now, cover two is the most common of all two high coverages, and how it works is each safety is assigned to cover a deep half of the field. So each safety has to cover their own half by themselves. And so double verticals attacks this really well because it creates a horizontal stretch on those safeties where they're forced to pick between covering that inside vertical and that outside vertical route, leaving one of them open a lot of the time for a big play. Now, not only does double verticals attack cover two in theory, but the data backs it up. In terms of average EPA per play and explosive play rate, as you can see in these charts, double verticals greatly outperforms other pass plays against cover two specifically. Let's look at a different route concept now against a different two high coverage. So here we have that smash concept I talked about earlier with the inside corner and the outside hook route. And we're looking at it against cover four, another very common two high coverage where this time, instead of having two DBs split the field in half, we're having four DBs split the field in the quarters. Now, smash works really well against cover four because of how it attacks that outside corner. It puts that outside corner into a vertical high-low stretch where they're forced to pick between covering that deep corner route and that shallow hook route, leading to easy completions for the offense. And this is once again reflected in the data. As you can see here, while the smash concept isn't very explosive against cover four, which makes sense as a lot of the time we're going to be checking it down, throwing that short hook route, the EPA per play and just overall consistency of success are very high compared to other routes against cover four. So we just talked about some of the best ways to attack too high coverage. But however, if we ran these too high beaters every single play, the defense would just get out of too high coverage. So that's not going to work for us. So we need to find an optimal balance for our passing game between using too high concepts and not. And in order to do that, we're going to employ game theory. Now, this table here shows how two high beating concepts and one high beating concepts did against two high coverage and one high coverage, with each doing better against the coverage they're designed to beat. Now, this chart right here, which is based on that table I just showed you, is going to be the key to unlocking that optimal balance for our passing offense. So in this chart, the x-axis represents the percentage of the time we as an offense are running two high beating concepts, with all the way at the left being if we only ran one high beating concepts, and all the way at the right being if we only ran two high beating concepts. The lines show our expected EPA per play, depending on which coverage the defense wants to run. So in blue, that will be two high coverage, and in orange, that would be one high coverage. For example, if we decided to run two high attacking concepts 20% of the time against a two high coverage, we could expect about 0.125 EPA per play. Against a one high coverage, a much better 0.21 EPA per play, since we're running more one high concepts. Game theory tells us that if the defense is acting perfectly rationally, they will always pick the lower of the two lines, the spot that minimizes our EPA per play as an offense. So as an offense, we must respond to this by picking the proportion where the lower of those two lines is the highest, has the most EPA per play, and that happens at that equilibrium point where the two lines meet. And at that equilibrium point, what that means is that the defense does not gain a clear advantage by either running a one high coverage against us or a two high coverage against us. In this case, in order for us to stay unpredictable and maximize our expected EPA per play as an offense, we want to look for that 53.6%, 46.4% breakdown between two high concepts and one high concepts. So wrapping up our overall two high beating strategy, our core tenets are going to be: use the fact that defenses like to run two high coverages against multiple tight ends to our advantage when we're trying to predict when we might see a two high coverage. And we want to employ those two high beating concepts like verticals and smash. However, we want to make sure we're doing it in moderation, also mixing in runs, also mixing in one high concepts, so we don't become predictable as an offense. I'm going to pass it over to Peter now, who's going to do a little analysis on the Vikings defense.
Thanks, Riley. Like we said earlier, Vikings have the highest 2i usage than any other teams. So we're now going to discuss what makes Vikings have the highest 2i usage and how they like to run it. It is important to know what looks on offense will be most frequently met with 2i coverage by the Vikings defense. The table on the left shows the Vikings 2i usage by offensive personnel, and the right shows by the receiver alignment. What's most notable is that of the two most common personnel groupings, personnel 12 and 11, the Vikings run 2i against 12 much more often, aligning with their findings that two tight end looks are most often met with 2i coverage. And the three pie charts show how the Vikings use 2i. On 2i, they mostly use 3-4-4 by a significant amount, and they're most likely going to be running it with two safeties, which shows that they don't really disguise as much. And the last one shows that they're most likely going to do cover 2 when they're using a 2-high coverage.
Thanks, Peter. So, as Riley kind of discussed that equilibrium where everyone's acting rationally, the Vikings maybe aren't acting as rational as they're pushing that too high usage and they're pushing that too high coverage. So, as an offense, we have to adapt to that coverage and push our equilibrium to the right to match that, utilizing too high beating concepts to match the Vikings' high tendency to play too high. So, we're pushing that distribution to the right to match that Vikings distribution of concepts. And then a little bit more scouting about the Vikings defense. They blitz a ton. And seeing on that graph where the arrow is specifically pointing to, they have a very normal distribution of when they blitz. They don't necessarily blitz a ton on third and long or third and medium, for example. They blitz on first down, second down, third down, all above average on first and second down. And they have a very normal distribution. So as an offense, we have to prepare for that on all downs. And then a bit of scouting about their personnel. They just have very versatile safeties with Harrison Smith, an all-pro. Josh Metellus, this graphic here is showing how Brian Flores kind of places these two safeties all around, and we have to read the alignment rather than the personnel for these safeties. So what's our game plan to beat the Minnesota Vikings on offense?
Thanks, Jacob. So as Jacob talked about, we are very confident in the ability of our play to perform extremely well against a too high coverage. However, our play design will not be complete without an audible. If we get to the line of scrimmage and we don't like the look we see, we think maybe they're not going to run too high coverage. As you can see from this chart here, when the Vikings show too high safety, so when they have two players, in that safety position at the line of scrimmage, they run a too high coverage almost every single time. However, when they have one of their safeties come up into the box, it's much more mixed and unpredictable what they might run. And so we want to be prepared for that. So we drew up an audible that our offense can go to out of our original play. So how we want this to work is that if Drake May looks in that secondary and sees one of those two safeties is up in the box, we want him to check from our original play to this play. What's different about this play is that we replace that double verticals concept on the left side of the field with the levels concept, with Kayshon Boutte running a shallow in and Austin Hooper running a dig. Now, the reason we went with levels is because it is a great play against the one high coverage. As you can see, 0.244 EPA per pass against one high coverage is exceptional. And also conceptually, the reason that levels is so good against the one high coverage is the way it vertically stretches those linebackers covering the middle of the field. Whereas when Boutte and Hooper are crossing through those linebackers zone, they're going to be forced to drop back onto Hooper or come up on Boutte, giving us an easy completion. How we want this to be read is, like Jacob mentioned, the Vikings love to blitz. So first thing we want Drake May looking for is that blitz. So we want him to read those linebackers. If they're coming, if the blitz is coming, we want him to check it down quickly to Stevenson or Boutte on that shallow end. If those linebackers stay home, we then want May's eyes to go to that secondary. If those DBs rotate over into a too high look, as the Vikings do about 40% of the time, out of this one high look at the line of scrimmage. We want him to look right to that smash concept that beats cover two. However, if those safeties stay home and the defense shows a one high coverage, we want Drake May looking left to that levels concept that he'll be able to hit over the middle. Thank you all for listening to our presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
That was fantastic. I'm still recovering because that was a lot that came in there really quickly. I love the way you guys attacked the situational analysis here. I think that was one of the really hard aspects of this prompt, and you guys really went deep on that. Understanding route concepts as opposed to just routes, also, I thought was an area where you really stood out. And then I should have counted on the Nashville crew to introduce me to the Nash equilibrium. Very cool concept. Very. I love that you approached the game theory of it all as, hey, these are optimal rates that are unmovable, and there's nobody that you're playing against. It is game theory. It is a game. Um, and I like the way that you address that as well as the audibles at the end. I thought this was a really great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just going off of that, yeah, first of all, really good job, guys. I thought you guys kind of thought about the holistic process, really in depth, which is important in the game of football. The audible was like next level. I think that was something we haven't really seen today, which is probably one of the more important aspects. Just obviously nobody just walks out with only one play in mind. It's a game of push and pull. So I thought that was also super important. One quick question I had was you guys mentioned both EPA and just general success. How was general success measured? I think I might have missed that, or I'm not sure if it was touched on. Like, what were the two forms of success there?
Yeah, so the success rate, we didn't define it as like the typical success rate is based on down and distance. How we
Yep.
defined it was just percentage of plays with positive EPA. We were basically just trying to show like how often are you making a play that's advancing you towards scoring. So that's just going to be like that was kind of the point of that was to show the EPA per play was like the overall metric. The success rate was how consistently are we completing? Are we getting good yardage? And then the explosive play rate was like, are we pushing down the field? So that was kind of what we were trying to show there.
Cool. That makes sense. Yep.
Yeah, great work, guys. I thought it was really good. I also agreed that I thought the filtering of getting the correct data, like getting a data set was unique in terms of how you approached it. Um, yeah, I thought using concepts over routes was also a good idea as well. And then yeah, no, just good presentation overall. Very good work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
An additional question I guess I could ask, and I mean, there's a lot of ways to kind of think about it, but um, when kind of coming up with the idea that like a double vertical would be, or yield it like kind of the highest average EPA and stuff like that, did you guys think about I don't know. I'm just thinking about like different pass depths and how that kind of just naturally equates to EPA. Did you guys look into that at all? Just thinking about like deeper concepts. So like the verticals are going to be deep and just kind of looking at underneath routes and maybe formulating a game plan for like, hey, underneath is going to be our best option. These linebackers can't run this week. Did you guys kind of explore any of those avenues?
Yeah, I would say a lot of kind of our findings were kind of just searching into the data set and then letting the data set like lead us to our findings.
Mhm.
The main thing I would say is that there wasn't necessarily an air yard, so that like it would say first and 10, it goes for 20 yards. We're not sure if it's a 20-yard pass or if it was an underneath 3-yard pass with 17 yards after catch. So
Yep.
kind of our way to adjust for that was kind of just looking at the route concept, seeing verticals and taking that kind of arbitrary measure to implement verticals rather than, a 17-yard route kind of separating on the field yardage wise.